We are still governed by the slave codes. We are still governed by the slave codes. The intentions of this melancholy country have always been genocidal. The intentions of this melancholy country have always been genocidal.
And what we need now, more than ever, is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context. And what we need now, more than ever, is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context.
Of this melancholy country have always been genocidal. The intentions, we are still governed by the slave codes. Of this melancholy country, we are still governed by the slave codes. 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 We are still governed by the slave codes.
And what we need now, more than ever, is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context. And what we need now, more than ever, is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context.
We are still governed by the slave codes. We are still governed by the slave codes. The intentions, we are still governed by the slave codes of this melancholy country.
Now, more than ever,
we are still governed by the slave codes. The intentions,
systemic
we are still
racism
governed by the slave of this melancholy country. We are still governed by the slave codes genocidal.
And what
of this
we need
melancholy
now,
country
is a human rights
we are still
movement
governed
that challenges systemic racism in every single context.
Have always been genocidal. Have always been genocidal. Intentions have always been genocidal. Of this melancholy country. We are still governed by the slave codes.
And what we need now, more than ever, is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context. And what we need now more than ever is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context.
We are still governed by the slave codes. We are still governed by the slave codes. The intentions of this melancholic country have always been genocidal. Have always been genocidal. Have always been genocidal.
And what we need now more than ever is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context.
have always been genocidal. Have always been genocidal. The intentions of this melancholic country have always been genocidal. Have always been genocidal.
And what we need now more than ever is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context. And what we need now more than ever is a human rights movement that challenges systemic racism in every single context.
You ask me, whether I approve of violence. You ask me, whether I approve of violence. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. In the whole history of the United States, you ask me, whether I approve of violence. In the whole history of the United States, some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs. In the whole history of the United States, some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. The person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, what black people have experienced in this country since the time the first black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa. You ask me, whether I approve of violence. The person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, what black people have experienced in this country since the time the first black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa. In the whole history of the United States, the impact of racism has been to attempt to contain black people. Whether I approve of violence. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by whether I have absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, what black people have experienced in this country since the time the first black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa. The person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, but in the whole history of the United States, the impact of racism has been to attempt to contain black people. ask me whether I approve of violence. You ask me whether I approve of violence. You ask me whether I approve of violence. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. Some very, very good history of the United States. The impact of racism has been to attempt to contain black people. In the whole history of the United States, some very, very good impact of racism by bombs that were planted by racists. In the whole history of some very, very good United States, were killed by the impact of racism has been to attempt to contain. And the whole, some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that, some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists.
All right, I see Daniel. Hey. I see Shawn and crew. Hey. I see Gretchen.
Hello. Hi.
Hey. Welcome.
Hey, hello.
All right.
Don't follow that.
I know.
Yeah, that's going to the left.
Here, we're going to turn a bit. If anybody wants to gather around, feel free. If you want to hang back, that's fine too. Whatever you want. So, I will moderate this this Zoom meeting, but really I just want to get out of the way and get a conversation going. I need to do some introductions. First of all, Gretchen, can I start with you, please?
Sure.
Can I start with you? Everybody, Gretchen was not a part of the Philly Hive. We showed a video of hers earlier this morning, and it was after the Singapore transmission. Gretchen, you got a lot of great feedback about your video. And maybe you could just give a quick synopsis what that was, because there's people in the room that didn't experience it, but also people in the Zoom who didn't experience it.
Yes, Yeah, it was a brief, about 20-minute, more of a PowerPoint kind of presentation, but with a narrative kind of voiceover that was focused on considerations for art therapists in regards to e-professionalism and kind of conduct online and in the kind of digital internet sort of space in a nutshell, and different kind of concepts and things kind of connected to that. Yeah.
And thank you for being with us on Zoom. And while I think everybody's content was really different, my students will laugh because I'm always sort of thinking in this sort of meta out there way, but I see connections. So I kind of wanted to do that. So thank you for presenting your part, and we'll sort of,
no problem.
Daniel, give us, I think everybody in the room experienced Daniel's participatory video presentation. Shawn, did you guys get a chance to see or hear?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Daniel, will you give a synopsis too, just sort of a brief description? What were you sharing?
So basically, I was kind of sharing a couple things in terms of my journey to art therapy, starting, working as a documentary filmmaker for some time, and then finding this participatory approach to filmmaking, which allowed for the participants and the subjects of the film to really take control of the film for themselves and to get behind the camera and get in front of the computer for editing and things like that. And so really having agency in terms of telling their story. I worked with lots of kind of human rights issues in different places. And now I'm an art therapist at a community counseling center. So that's kind of a brief synopsis, I guess.
And also background as an artist and a musician. Daniel, could you share a little bit about musically, kind of where you come from, what you do?
I dabble. I enjoy doing music stuff. So I think that I've learned a lot of music from my clients, to be honest. I used to work in residential, like with group homes, and we were fortunate enough to get some funding from Chicago Public Schools to get some equipment for recording and whatnot. And the kids that I worked with, a lot of them wanted to put out like mixtapes and just put out their music in different ways. And so yeah, it was kind of a fun process of learning the equipment together and hearing how their productions took shape. And yeah, I like to do some production, especially with like making soundscapes, layering like snippets from Karen Pence talking about art therapy was one of my more recent projects. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love music, and I love like what you guys just did. The group that just performed, that was really amazing. So anyway, yeah,
maybe we'll sort of start there, and Shawn, if you all want to share something as well, kind of bring it to us. But maybe we'll sort of start, and then we'll sort of arc back to other presentations. But again, in my mind, some of the arc here is about dissemination on the internet, conscious participation on the internet, creative production, either by oneself or in co-creation with others, and sort of the meaningfulness of that, the power of that, but also the fragility and I don't know, the grace of that. And I'm going to stop talking and give it over to the musicians. Shawn.
Yeah, well, we're part of an ongoing project called Hands at Midnight. I'm not in art therapy. I'm a PhD candidate and professor in ethnic studies here at CU Boulder. And so, a lot of what we teach and what we work on, analyze, etc., is using performance as a strategy or as strategies of resistance and platforms of activism in regards to parameters of intersectionality, so race, gender, sexuality, class, those sorts of things. Today's piece took a bit more of an angle on taking a more of a feminine approach to constructions of resistance against racism. I used a lot of samples from old interviews of Angela Davis, James Baldwin, and then a more recent segment of the samples I used were from Opal Tometi, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and then juxtaposing those samples with the other musicians in this project and singers in this project. And I think in using that repetition as a way of sort of as a sort of out of the body experience, as a way to remove yourself maybe from your any type of negative outside surroundings that you may be experiencing at the moment. I think it was kind of a foundation of a lot of what we're doing today, or really a foundation of what we do with a lot of the music that we've been playing and working on. Billy and I have been working on this project for about 4 years now. And so a lot of the parameters we use today is something that's just basically very intrinsic of what we've been doing for years now. And then bringing, Cleopatra and Amber and their vocal abilities into this. So it takes this to a completely different level. It's been a real interesting pleasure and learning experience, especially using these platforms of technology that have been presented to us as well. Without Patrick Clark, there's no possible way we would have been able to do any of this. I notified him about this like 3 weeks ago, and he's just been on the ball, working with Natalie and Narun to do this in a place where it can be presented in this sort of a global setting. So it's been a lot of fun.
it had a lot of impact. I don't know if we can capture, Sarah, anything you want to share, just sort of what we received in the, we have like over 200 people kind of coming in and out, listening and watching the stream from all over the world, really. I don't know what we captured. Anything stick out, Sarah, as far as feedback or response?
Yeah, Sarah Crow said, stunning. The visuals and textures of sound are so powerful. And another user, Power in Our Hands video, said he had to actually stand up. He couldn't sit down while watching because he thought it was, he said, it was great to feel the shadow of the guy photographing and to see the singer behind me. I had to stand up listening to this.
That's great. I'm glad that it moved different people in that way. That's the point of it, and it makes it more enjoyable for us to be able to present that sort of thing. You never know how it's going to translate, but in a sense, sometimes that doesn't really matter. It's more about you just have to kind of do it and get it out there, and whatever happens from there, as long as you're coming from a positive place, you really can't be wrong. Those comments, so I appreciate that.
And we've got one more from Power in Our Hands videos here. They say, really like the thread of social engagement and justice. Question for the musicians: what kind of spaces and audiences do they share their music with or in?
Wow. Yeah, not enough. We don't play out nearly as much as we'd like to. Yeah, this is actually our first time that the four of us have been able to play live. We've all been kind of rehearsing off and on, messing around with sounds and vocals and whatnot since probably early fall, late summer, early fall. Yeah. So this is the first time the four of us have played, publicly live for anyone even here. So I don't know. We'll see. There's some ideas for gigs over the coming months to see what happens.
Daniel or Gretchen, anything you'd like to contribute? Just sort of knowing your own work or connecting to your own work. Again, you both, I don't know, there's similarities I know in my own head because I know you all, but maybe it's harder for you to feel them.
I like this idea of repetition to subvert. I found that to be really, really powerful. I think you put it better than I did or I could in terms of the way that can function. But yeah, I've done some work with clients more recently in terms of just creating these soundscapes through it's a app called Loopy. It's a very kind of goofy app for Apple products where you kind of press on it and then it goes around once and you press again and it creates like different things that are locked into the same BPM. And it's a very organic way for kids especially to kind of, let's make something what sounds angry and kind of looping that anger on top of each other in different sounds. And then to like hearing that again and again and again and what that does to them and how then we think about, how this translates, like these sounds translate in real life. Like, does that like that? What does that look like with mom? And when you do that, like what does she do? Anyway, so when you were talking about that, that's what I was thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because one of the theoretical concept that I'm working on right now has a lot to do with not only sound or music from an oral sense, but from a corporeal sense. The body. What are those sounds?
Bring in the body, please.
Inward. And how is that applied to your outside surroundings? So it's hard to explain because I'm at the very beginnings of unpacking this theory that I'm working on. But this is kind of what we did today is, again, sort of an action-based application of some of the stuff that I'm trying to unpack, and working towards my dissertation that I'll begin writing, in the next year or two. So.
I mean, one thing I'm really struck by, having gone to a lot of music and performances and being able to be in the action of it, not 20 feet away, a mile away, stadiums, but being more intimate music venues, I've just always been able to appreciate feeling the frequency, the spit and the sweat coming at you, et cetera, and sort of the visceral sensations. But one thing that strikes me about the digital media and the aspect of how you all set up today is that ability for us to be kind of like between you and in you, and in a way that would be inappropriate, if you were singing or performing in front of us, because we would be too close, we would be in your way. But it's the sense of sort of, it's a different sort of corporal feel, in the music. You can really insert yourself in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I had a general idea of how we would set up, and when we got to the space today, Amber and Cleopatra just sort of took over and really aesthetically, set everything that, just worked in terms of, I think, of allowing the audience to feel, as you just mentioned, as we're sort of in between the members of the band and creating just a different sort of collaborative space than I think than what a lot of musicians maybe will allow themselves to play in. Usually you go to a show and it's a stage and people lined up across, rather than sort of a semicircle where everyone can see and face each other and working that way. But in my experience with a lot of the ensembles that I've played with over the last 15, 20 years of my life, this sort of arrangement has been used quite a bit, and it's also sort of an arrangement that you use in a classroom,
right,
especially at the graduate level, so that you can see everyone, rather than sitting in these rows where people are sitting behind each other. You have these smaller groups that sit in these sort of semicircles, so it forces a different type of interaction between people and a different type of energy between people. So, I think it's for our benefit to apply that in art as well.
This is an excellent segue for Gretchen. Yes. Gretchen, I want to get you in this conversation. Your work is so much about repetition. Your work is about so much like sort of bringing a different relationship between people. I mean, mail art, right? Way back. And, right? Right?
Yeah.
I remember that. And it's been some time. And then also through internet connections and sort of passing art,
yes.
But we do have a question for you, Sarah. What and maybe it'll connect.
This is actually a question about your presentation from Power in Our Hands videos. They said, Gretchen, your work is so important and helpful. Have you had any pushback or resistance to e-professionalism?
Some, a little bit, not a lot, but I think the pushback can be more about like what one person views as professional and somebody else views as unprofessional. Like who determines that? Who kind of monitors or manages or gauges or polices, kind of that, and people feeling like, they don't want that sort of being, if I post this or I share this, is that unprofessional, and is that going to come back to me? Like, in ethically, I know the Art Therapy Credentials Board and their ethical kind of standards are kind of starting to really address more of social media, which is great, but it's also sort of, there's a lot of not known for that too, and who like determines kind of that, and people worrying about that, and being able to freely speak and authentically kind of share especially if it's sort of like your own personal sort of views, like, and not necessarily, you know, your professional kind of self. Like, how does that intersect or overlap, or do they? Are they one and the same? So I think there's a lot of sort of unknown about that, but also can create like anxiety for that as well, you know, defining kind of that, because it can be subjective. Yeah, that was a really good question.
Yeah, sometimes the artist in creative arts therapy, I know for Shawn and you all, you might not be able to relate, but it's this odd dilemma in therapy where our artists' personal selves collide with our professional selves, and we all have different ways of sort of navigating those, integrating those, segregating those. I know I've had a wealth of experience for 25 years now. And most people just don't have, well, I think people do have to think about it, especially when you're bringing subject matter, Shawn, that you all are bringing about gender, about race, about the experience of the self. And especially if you're experiencing double consciousness, if you're experiencing discrimination or any sort of segmentation, code switching. I mean, you know, again, I know these are really different things, but in the same way, they actually reside together.
And I think when you had said, like at the very, very beginning, before we each started speaking, I think you used the word like intentional, right? And how you like show up. And I think that's very true for like no matter what, whether it's in, you know, being a therapist or, you know, related to music, but thinking about that intentionally and what we're like putting out there, you know, sort of either in the digital space or the virtual kind of environment, and that digital kind of footprint that we're leaving behind. And there's no like hard, like right or wrong, you know, good or bad, you know, all of that, but like that it does have an impact, not just on us individually, but I think about within our therapy, it can also really translate maybe to the art therapy field or the profession as a whole. You know, it can't, because it's such a small community, sort of with that. And so being thoughtful and very mindful about that, I think people can really benefit from that, because social media or technology can be very fast paced, very much, you know, reactive, you know, and kind of slowing that down a little bit can be, I think, a good thing to kind of think of.
Right.
Yeah.
And the consciousness and the co-creation of it, yeah.
Yes, yeah, because there's a lot of really good, positive, and expressive, and even when things are challenging and kind of difficult, that I think technology can really lend itself sort of to, for people to express and have a voice.
Right.
You know.
Speaking of voice, I actually wanted to ask Cleopatra or Amber just anything if they wanted to share. I mean, as a listener of music, sometimes singer, but certainly not what you all do, what you both do, that vulnerability, you know, of sharing your voice, sharing, you know, out of the body sound, etc. Just curious if you had any comments or anything that you'd like to share with us.
I think of singing as a very therapeutic thing, so it was interesting listening to you guys talk about music therapy and using music as a form of therapy, because I feel like when I perform, it is very transcending and I do feel out of body. I almost wish that I could have like stepped out of myself just now and watched us perform like in front of the camera. And I hope that when I am performing, that the same transcendence that I'm feeling transfers over to the people that I'm performing to as well.
Yeah, and for me, it was just the lyrics. Like right before we came on, I was telling Amber, like, we just need to feel the words, you know? And instead of like, I think that was a big thing about this piece, was really just like internalizing what the words meant to like myself and what's going on and how it pertains to society right now, and kind of just like outwardly expressing that like through my voice. There were some moments where I just like closed my eyes and felt like the words or how to sing a certain phrase, like how I felt that phrase, you know. So I think music is very therapeutic.
Yeah. And I think on that last part of the song, we really intended for the repetitiveness of it to fill in transit and kind of capture people in that moment.
Right. No, it was very, very powerful. Anybody in the room, do you want to share any impacts of it, or? No? I mean, there was a lot of response. I think it's sort of beyond the words. I mean, it was very powerful. I mean, in the room as well as people responding on the chat and sharing thoughts.
Thank you.
I keep thinking
sorry.
Yeah, it was powerful for us.
Yeah.
Right, Kara. We have a comment.
I just keep thinking of one of you used the word transcending, and I think that's a very powerful way to think about it, because the sound fills the space, and yet, you know, in your own mind, you're sort of filling your own space and your own meditation, and the sound almost becomes physical in that way, where you can feel it. So yeah, it was very beautiful.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very well said. You know, and that's a really you just gave another really interesting perspective, a completely different perspective of how to conceptualize a lot of this, and you know, especially for future performances and future thought around performances. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Daniel, just a final shout out to your young people that were in the videos, and adults as well, that just the power of music for people to bring people together, you know, to decrease isolation, you know, to show kinship, you know, to show play, to interact, whether it's dance or gesture, singing, etc. Very, very powerful to see all that displayed, and to feel it in our own bodies. You know, I know we were all kind of moving in the the video.
Well, and I think one thing I think along this idea of transcendence too, there's what I was thinking of when you guys were talking about this, is there's this sense, like for the kids I worked with on the music video, of feeling that way in the moment, but also like with digital technology, playing it back and watching themselves and being like, wow, that was an additional transcendent moment, which I think is a really, I don't know, cool thing too.
Amber spoke to that too, like wanting to see that secondary experience of herself and of the whole. For the sake of time, we have to shut this down and curtail, but I wish we could keep talking. I think this is a really
we will talk.
Discussion.
Hopefully you and I will get to collaborate together again. It's been many, many years. Natalie
I know, Shawn.
Wow, what, 15 years ago or something? 14 years ago, so. Yeah.
Musical kinship. Yeah. It never dies. All right, brother. All right, everybody, I just want to give you a group squeeze hug. Thank you for being a part of this. Insanity, beauty, interprofessional, intercultural, creative persons. It's just amazing. We got to pass on to Vancouver, Canada.
Thank you. Thanks again to Patrick Clark and then the Bobby Broadway for the visuals. Appreciate it, guys. Love you guys. And thank you again for allowing us to do this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and everybody's work. Yes.
Right.
Yes, it's very inspiring.
Yes, very much.
Go forth, be creative, all of us, all right?
Yeah, yes.
All right, signing off.
Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.
Justice too. All right, bye.